Leafs trade talks are really starting to pick up as a brand new report from Frank Saravalli has dropped, revealing a big Treliving trade update. We're going to break down exactly what this report entails and discuss what it means going forward. But before we get into it, folks, quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. If you're a part of the 70% who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Leafs content. We're getting close to 15,000 subscribers. We're less than 200 subscribers away, about 150 away at the time of recording. So make sure to hit that subscribe button. Thank you guys again for your continued support. But Darius, an insane game yesterday between the USA and Canada, obviously. But we're going to shift our focus a little bit now to, once again, the Leafs and trade talks that have dropped. Now, it's been pretty quiet on the trade front so far throughout the Four Nations Cup, All-Star break, and all these different things that are going down. But I suspect things are really going to start to pick up as the season resumes and obviously towards that deadline, which is about a month away, but less than a month away. So a new report has dropped. You saw it there in the intro a little bit. It is a Montreal Canadian. And this is from Frank Saravalli. He updated his Valentine's trade matchmaker. He has the Leafs and Canadians as a potential trade fit for center Jake Evans. And proposed trade is Jake Evans and a Montreal, a second-round pick, and one of the prospects here, Vonin. So this is a very interesting one. You see here, Leafs Habs trade always feels unusual, but it wasn't long ago that Montreal sent another third-line center to Toronto at the 2018 deadline. And this isn't the first time we've heard about Jake Evans to the Leafs. It's been around for a very long time now, whether it be Frank Saravalli. I think Elliot Freeman as well poked it out there in one of his 32 thoughts earlier on in the season. This is a very interesting one, and one that you don't see trades between these two rivals very often, but if it makes sense here, it makes sense.
Not very often. And this is giving me big vibes from 2018, Thomas McClanac acquiring him from the Montreal Canadiens. And I would not do this trade. I don't think that the Leafs should trade within the Atlantic Division. There's no way you should give up assets to the Montreal Canadiens unless you're getting like a very big difference-making centerman or something like that, which is just not possible from the Montreal Canadiens. They're looking for center help themselves as well. So I would not do this trade, and I don't think that this is the best option out there for the Leafs. I understand what Frank is trying to say because it's definitely an option, and it's something that, you know, the Leafs wouldn't have to overpay for like we're seeing with Scott Laughton and some of the other names that have been mentioned. So I do get it from that side of things, but in terms of an overall fit, personally, right? Because we're going to get into how he fits into the team. But personally, I don't think that this puts them over the edge. I think that they're spending assets that they don't need to on Jake Evans. And why would you try and help out, to a degree, an Atlantic Division rival? Not just Atlantic Division, the Montreal Canadiens.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually kind of like the trade for a couple of reasons. Granted, again, if you put the Canadians thing aside, do I think it's going to happen? That's the big question. But at least the good thing is it is the Florida's 2025 pick. So in theory, it shouldn't be a fantastic pick because Florida's always a perennial contender. However, when you're talking about again, this is obviously a hypothetical trade from Frank Saravalli. When you're talking about the price of a lot of these players, there hasn't really been a player that the Leafs won't have to give up a first round pick for, whether it be guys like Scott Laughton or some of the higher level players. And you're looking at Jake Evans' stats. I think if you put the Canadians thing aside, which you can't really do because it obviously is a rival, but if you're strictly looking at the players and the assets going in and out, he has 27 points in 56 games. So he would be the third line center for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And it does seem like a second round pick is, a little bit expensive in previous years. But when you're talking about the other players that are available now, I mean, there's obviously talks of Brock Nelson, a couple guys like that. But out of the ones we've heard here, this is the most, by far and away, the most reasonable price center that I've seen. So if everyone else is costing first-round picks, Fraser Minton, and then you can get Jake Evans for a second-round pick that's not your own and then a middling prospect, I think it might be, if this ends up being the only available option besides a first-round pick, I could see it being a good trade, at least for me personally.
Yeah, and I think I understand that side of things 100%. It is the most reasonably priced player out there right now that at least we've covered. And a second round pick really isn't that bad for a guy who can come in and definitely he can play third line center for you in the NHL right now and make a difference in that way. I just don't think that he's a big difference maker for the Leafs. I think they need something else in a third line center personally, but it's an interesting option if we do take a look at it and where he might fit into the team. He's only 28. He is a UFA at the end of this year, so he would be a rental. Obviously, they would have to re-sign him if they wanted to retain his services. I'm not a big fan of that either, and by everything we've heard, they want term on the deal, but obviously, like, that's not a deal breaker or anything. If they're going to go out and get a guy for a reasonable price and he is a free agent at the end of this year and they think that it makes the team better, they're going to do that, right? They're going to go ahead and make the team better. But in terms of the fit, I mean, he's a right shot, right? Earlier this season, I said that it could be a decent move. It could be something that they look at. I've kind of changed my mind on that just because of everything we've heard recently and what this team actually needs, and we can see it on the ice the last little while. So again, it's nice that he's a right shot. The Leafs don't have any right shot centermen, right? So that helps. He's not the biggest body either. So not a fan of this move specifically, but if they went out to do this move, I wouldn't I wouldn't hate it because they're not giving up too much. I just don't like the idea of giving assets to the Montreal Canadiens. And again, I don't think this is a guy that puts you over the top. We've been talking about going out and winning a Stanley Cup. The window's 2 to 3 years right now. If your only move at this deadline is this guy at third line center and maybe a depth defenseman, you're not doing much there.
Yeah, and the benefit of this mock trade is that you still have you keep your assets, you keep your obviously not this year's first, they don't have it, but your future first round pick you keep Fraser Minton. So I had some things coming up here. Obviously, a defensively responsible center. It seems like the Habs are going to trade him. You see this here from Frank Saravalli. If Evans isn't returning, maximizing value is key. They had a mid-second round offer for him at last year's draft, so you want to at least match that, and that's where, of course, here Vonin comes in, which is a mid 2020 second round pick. So I mean, if the Leafs go out and get a Jake Evans for this price, and then you go out and get somebody else, whether that's a guy like Dylan Cousins for Fraser Minton in a first, and maybe you throw in Rasmus Ristolainen in there, you can get more players. I think at the end of the day, they need a third line center very badly. But if Evans is the only move, I don't think it's good. And that's what this tweet here says. I mean, if this is the only move, there's just no real point of doing it because I don't think that's going to make a big difference. But if this is a move you either do after you make a bigger splash or before, I mean, I could see this being their only move because they're not going to stand pat at this deadline. They need a third line center at the least. And if this ends up being the only option, I could see a very realistic possibility that this gets done, even though sounds crazy because it's the Canadians. But I think the prices are just so high right now that I don't think Brad Living's going to overpay. Now, if Evans costs a first or even Fraser Minton, not even a conversation because he's an expiring player. But again, we know that he wants, term. But if they get somebody with term, like a Dylan Cousins, like somebody else, and then they also get Jake Evans as maybe that final piece, I think then it could be worth it. Albeit it is the Canadians and trades don't happen too often between the teams. But let's also keep in mind here, I mean, the Habs are they're definitely going to be trading Jake Evans, and they're not really competing this year with the Leafs. At least I wouldn't think so, even though they did have a hot stretch there for a while.
Yeah, it looks like they were actually going to make the playoffs for a while. I'm not sure if that ends up happening. There's a couple other teams that are fighting for that spot too and on the rise. But, there is a world where this trade does happen. But for me, we've been talking recently about, Scott Laughton. I said it last week. The price for Scott Laughton right now is absolutely ridiculous. I don't think you pay that, right? But at the same time, if you really think about it, the way the Leafs have played this season, we've seen in years past with Kyle Dubas, even last year, where they go, we're not going to pull the trigger on any moves because they're not playing well. Like we can't get these guys help because they're not going to win a Stanley Cup, even if they get help, right? This year that's not the case. Yes, they've had stretches of poor play. Every team does though, but for the majority of this season, they've looked like they've taken their game to another level. And a couple guys like Mitch Marner, for example, I know it's a contract year, but he's having a career year, right?
Even
William
Tavares
Nylander's
as well.
having, yeah, John Tavares is playing great. William Nylander's having a career year as well, right? So, considering all those things, I think that you do have to go out and get a bigger fish than this. This doesn't put you over the top, right? And you're still spending assets in that way. So I think that they have to go out and they have to make, a difference making trade this year to give themselves the best chance to win. And I don't think it's this one. That being said, I still think that the price for Scott Laughton is insane. But listen, if it helps you win, you have like a 3-year window here. He has term. Maybe you go ahead and pull the trigger.
Let us know down below. Would you prefer Jake Evans at a cheaper deal or Scott Laughton at a more expensive one? Keep in mind, Jake Evans' cap is only $1.7 million. Makes it very easy to move around. And the percentage of the cap it is, I mean, you could extend him beyond this season, similarly to what they're going to do with a lot of these players, especially when you get players who are, actual third line centers. They're a bit easier to extend because you have familiarity with the team. And you can also, of course, have, the money to do so. Let us know down below who you would prefer between Scott Laughton and Jake Evans, given the price. Very interesting reports coming out. We're going to keep you up to date with all the latest news. Leafs hockey is coming back soon. We, of course, hopefully we'll see a Canada versus USA final, assuming Canada wins the next game. So keep you guys up to date. Thank you guys for watching. Cheers.